Everyone needs a summer job, but you just had to go and get a part-time position at the
Hang on, it's still showing the thing.
Oh shit, that's chapter 5.
Okay.
Are we rolling?
I forgot how long this.
Enjoy your Cracker Barrel favorites in our home or yours. Dine-in, curbside, or delivery available now.
Jessica said, still very happy with herself. As they walked on, Carlton swept up and took her arm. Your voice is amazing, he said. It's just good acoustics, Jessica said, attempting... Sorry about that. 1 second, please.
Break time?
Yeah, small,
You're fine.
small break.
Alright, we're gonna BRB real quick. If you, Ian, Elliot, do you mind, popping in and sticking up for a bit?
Yeah, we're here.
Alright,
Alright.
if you guys want, ask Anne and Elliot, the delivery people, some questions. We will be back in one momento.
So, how is chat doing? How you guys doing? Oh, God. Okay. I just had to make sure I knew where it was. Oh man. So yeah, for me. This is gonna be a long chapter, especially because for this one, in my copy of the book, it goes up to page 82 until we hit chapter 3.
Yeesh.
And right now, we are on page 45.
Well, for you.
So this boy thick.
Yup. Alright. Everyone's asking how we are.
I'm pretty good. Doing pretty good. Death, Death, to answer your question, I have the first run of the book. So it's not the revised cover and the revised version that came out I think a year later. This is the first release one.
The OG.
Yeah, the OG.
Also, don't mind me. I'm nomming on popcorn because I haven't eaten all day.
Why have you not eaten all day?
Tiredness, depression. I almost took a nap, and then I'm like, look, this time, like, oh yeah, I got to stream later on. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna be your alarm to tell you, hey, bitch, eat.
Technically, I'm eating.
I mean,
Although
real food. You better. You make me very upsetty and spaghetti if you don't.
I will just. Yeah, nothing sounded good. So.
Do you have all 3 Fnaf books? Because I have all 3 already. Yeah. Paula does. I only have the first book and the second book. I don't have the third one.
I have all 3 books.
Also still gotta get Fazbear Fright and the Freddy Files and the security survival book.
I have the security logbook.
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about. That's the one I don't. That's another one I don't have.
Yeah, I have the trilogy and the logbook, the security logbook. I want to try and get all the other ones.
Yeah. Which I also tried playing the first game on the Switch. Like, it's good, but I prefer it on PC. Like, because the controls work fine, but I feel stiff with the controller. In the case of Five Nights at Freddy's, it feels much better with a keys and mouse with a keys and mouse board, with a mouse and keyboard.
None of us can speak tonight.
And I will say you're right. This book does have a good atmosphere, but in my opinion, the writing can go from awkward to friggin' better. How would that be optimized for the Switch? Death, get it. Like, that's the best way I could put it. Fnaf is on PS4 now. Oh, it is on PS4 now. Yeah, that's right. Not counting Help Wanted, because I have that.
Sorry about
And,
that, guys. Oh, sorry.
It's all good. But I will say they are releasing Help Wanted with no VR support as well. But I feel you lose the immersion without the VR support. But Kaiser, you good?
Yeah, just
He had a slight coughing fit.
yeah.
Oh, I hate those.
Yeah, it stinks. Especially after you sneeze. But
Oh
I'll be
God.
alright. I should be able to get through this.
You know what I hate? When you sneeze and fart at the same time.
Oh, that's the worst.
You mean a
Like
snort?
right when it hits.
A snort.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, those suck.
They do. Ah, but luckily...
Okay.
Alright. Back to the story.
Yeah.
It's just good acoustics, Jessica said, attempting humility, but not meaning a word of it. They walked the empty halls, peering into each of the massive cavities where a department store might have been. Some parts of the mall had been almost finished, while others were in shambles. Some hallways were littered with piles of dusty concrete bricks and stacks of wood. Others were lined with glass paneled storefronts, lights hanging in perfect rows above their heads. It's like a lost city, John said. Like Pompeii, said Jessica, just without the volcano. No, Charlie said, there's nothing here. The whole place had a sterile feel to it. It was not abandoned. It had never sustained life at all. She looked in a store window across from her, one of the few with glass, wondering what would have been displayed. She imagined mannequins, dressed in bright clothing, but when she tried to picture them, all she could see was blank faces, concealing something. She suddenly felt out of place, unwelcomed by the building itself. Charlie began to feel restless, some of the luster wearing off the adventure. They had come. Freddy's was gone, and so was the shrine she had kept in her thoughts, where she could still find Michael playing, where she last saw him. John stopped suddenly, turning off the flashlight as carefully as he could. He put a finger to his lips, motioning for silence. He gestured back the way they had come. In the distance, they saw a small light bobbing in the darkness, like a ship in the fog. "Someone else is here," he hissed. "A night guard, maybe," Carlton whispered. "Why would an abandoned building need a guard?" Charlie wondered. "Kids probably come here to party," Carlton said, then grinned. "I would have come here to party too, if I had known about it, or if I'd partied." "Okay, well, let's backtrack slowly," John said. "Jessica," he started, then made a zip-it motion across his lips. They continued down the hallway, this time with only the dimmer light of Carlton's keychain. "Wait!" Jessica stopped with a whisper, looking intently at the walls surrounding them. Something is not right. "Yeah, no giant pretzels, I know." Carlton seemed sincere. Jessica waved a hand at him impatiently. "No, something isn't right about the architecture." She took several steps back, trying to see the whole of it. "Something is definitely not right," she repeated. "It's bigger on the outside." "Bigger on the outside?" Charlie repeated, sounding puzzled. "I mean, there's a big difference between where the inside wall is and where the outside wall is. Look." Jessica ran along a length of wall between where two stores would have been. There would have been a store here and a store there. John pointed to the obvious, not understanding the problem. "But there's something in the middle," Jessica exclaimed, beating her hands against an empty portion of the wall. "This part juts out of the parking lot, like the stores on each side, but there's no way into it." "You're right," Charlie started, walking towards Jessica, studying the walls. "There should be another entrance here. And," Jessica dropped her voice that only Charlie could hear her, "about the same size as Freddy's, don't you think?" Charlie's eyes widened and she took a quick step back from Jessica. "What are you two whispering about?" Carlton stepped closer. "We're talking about you," Jessica said sharply, and they walked into one of the vacant department stores that seemed to sandwich the sealed space. "Come on," she said. "Let's take a look." They started combing the wall as a group, clustered around the tiny light. Charlie was not sure what to hope for. Aunt Jen had warned her about coming back. She didn't encourage Charlie to skip the memorial, not directly, but she wasn't pleased that Charlie was returning to Hurricane. "Just be careful," Aunt Jen had said. "Some things, some memories, are best left undisturbed." "Is that why you kept Dad's house?" Charlie thought now. "Is that why you kept paying for it, leaving it untouched, like some kind of shrine, but never visiting?" "Hey!" John was gesturing wildly, running inside to catch up to the rest of them. "Hide!" The light was out in the hall again, bobbing up and down, and it was coming closer. Charlie glanced around. They were already too deep inside the massive store to get out in time, and there seemed to be nowhere to hide. "Here, here!" Jessica whispered. There was a brick in the wall beside a rig of scaffolding, and they had hurried into it, squeezed racing past stacks of open boxes and sheets of plastic hanging from the ceiling. They made their way down what appeared to be a makeshift hallway just on the other side of the department store wall. It was really more like an alley. It was incongruous with the rest of the mall. Not shiny and new, but dank and musty. One wall was made of the same concrete as the outside of the building, though it was rough and unfinished, and the other was exposed brick, some parts faded smooth with age, others with the mortar crumbling, leaving chinks and holes. Heavy wooden shelves of cleaning equipment stood against the wall, listening to the side, their boards sinking under the weight of old paint cans and mysterious buckets. Something was dripping from uncovered pipes overhead, leaving puddles that they all stepped carefully around. A mouse scuttled by, almost running over Carlton's foot. Carlton made a strangled sound, hand over his mouth. They crouched down behind one of the wooden shelving units, pressing up against the wall. Charlie doused the light and waited. She took shallow breaths, perfectly still, watching and wishing she had picked a better position to freeze into. After a few minutes, her legs started to feel numb under her, and Carlton was so close that she could smell the light, pleasant scent of his shampoo. "That's nice," she whispered. "Thanks," Carlton said, knowing immediately what she was referring to. "It comes in Ocean Breeze and Tropical Paradise. I prefer Ocean Breeze, but it dries the scalp." "Hush!" John hissed. Charlie wasn't sure why she was so worried. It was just a night guard, and at the worst, they would have to be asked to leave, maybe yelled at a little. She had an overblown aversion to getting in trouble. The bobbing light came closer. Charlie was acutely aware of her body, holding every muscle motionless. Suddenly, she could make out a thin figure leaning in from the great. Sorry, I'm going to read that again. Suddenly, she could make out a thin figure leaning in from the great room outside. He shone his light in a long beam down the hallway, sweeping it up and down the walls. "He's got us," Charlie thought, but inexplicably, he turned and went, apparently satisfied. They waited another few minutes, but there was nothing. He was gone. They all moved slowly out of their crouched positions, stretching limbs that had gone into sleep. Carlton shook one foot vigorously until he could stand on it. Charlie looked down at Jessica, who was still hunched over, as if frozen in time. "Jessica, are you okay?" she whispered. Jessica looked up, smiling. Also, for those of you who are following along, the edition of the book I have is page 42. "You won't believe this." She was pointing at the wall, and Charlie leaned over to see. There, etched in the worn brick, were clumsy letters, almost illegible in a child's handiwork. "Carlton smells like feet." "You have to be kidding me," John whispered in awe, turning to face the wall and placing both hands against it. "I recognize these bricks," he laughed. "These are the same bricks!" His smile faded. "They didn't tear it down. They built around it. It's still here." Jessica unsuccessfully tried to keep her voice down. "There has to be a way in," she added, her eyes wide with an almost childish excitement. Charlie shone the flashlight up and down the hallway, playing the light off each wall. But there was no break, no door. "There was a back door to Freddy's," John said. Marla wrote that right next to the back door, right? Why didn't they just knock it down? Charlie pondered. Does this hallway just lead nowhere? Jessica said, puzzled. It's the story of my life, Carlton said lightly. Wait. Charlie ran her fingers along the edge of the shelf, peering through the odds and ends crammed onto it. The wall behind it looked different. It was metal, not brick. Right here. She stepped back and looked at the others. Help me move it. John and Jessica pressed against one side in a unified effort, and she and Carlton pulled on the other. It was immensely heavy, laden with cleaning supplies and large buckets of nails and tools, but it slid farther down the hall almost easily without incident. Jessica stepped back, breathing hard. John, give me the big light again. He handed it over, and she turned it back on, aiming it where the shelf had stood. This is it, she said. It was metal and rusting, spattered with paint, a stark contrast to the walls around it. There was only a hole where the handle had been. Someone must have removed it so the shelf could lie flush against the door. Silently, Charlie handed the flashlight back to John, and he held it above her head so she could see. She slipped around the others and tried to squeeze her fingers into the hole where the doorknob once was, trying to pull it open to no avail. It's not going to open, she said. John was behind her, peering over her shoulder. Just a second. He squeezed himself into the space beside her and knelt carefully. I don't think it's locked or anything, he said. I think it's just rusty. Look at it. The door extended all the way to the floor, its bottom ragged and unfinished. The hinges were on the other side, and the edges were caked in rust. It looked as though it had not been opened in years. John and Charlie pulled on it together, and it moved a fraction of an inch. Yay! Jessica exclaimed, almost shouting, then covered her mouth. Sorry, she said in a whisper, containing my excitement. They took turns pulling on it, leaning over one another, the metal scraping their fingers. The door held for a long moment, and then it came loose under the weight, swinging open slowly with an unearthly screech. Charlie looked nervously over her shoulder, but the guard did not appear. The door opened only about a foot wide, and they went one by one until all four were through. Inside, the air changed, and they all stopped short. Ahead of them was a dark hallway, familiar to them all. Is this? Jessica whispered, not taking her eyes from the dark expanse. It's here, Charlie thought. She held out her hand for the flashlight, and John handed it to her wordlessly. She shone the light ahead of them, sweeping the walls. They were covered in children's drawings, crayon on yellowing, curling paper. She stared forward, and the others followed, feet shuffling on old tile. It seemed to take forever to traverse the hall, or perhaps it was just that they were moving slowly, with methodical, deliberate steps. Eventually, the hallway opened up into a large expanse, the dining room. It was just as they remembered it, completely preserved. The flashlight beam bounced off 1,000 little things, reflective, glittered, or topped with foil ribbon. The tables were still in place, covered in their silver and white cheeked cloths. The chairs were pulled up to them haphazardly, some tables with too many and others with too few. It looked as though the room had been abandoned in the middle of the lunch hour. Everyone had gotten up expecting to return, but never did. They walked in cautiously, breathing cold, stale air that had been trapped inside for a decade. The whole restaurant gave off a sense of abandonment. No one was coming back. There was a small merry-go-round barely visible in the distant corner, with 4 child-sized ponies still at rest from their last song. In an instant, Charlie froze in place, as did the others. They were here. There they were. Eyes stared back from the dark, large and lifeless. An illogical panic pulsed through her. Time held still. No one spoke. No one breathed, as though a predatory animal was stalking them. But as the moments passed, the fear waned, until she was back again, as a child, and with old friends, separated from one another for far too long. Charlie walked towards the eyes in a straight line. Behind her, the others were motionless. Hers were the only footsteps. As Charlie walked, she touched the cold back of an old party chair without looking at it, guiding it out of her path. She took one final step, and the eyes in the dark became clear. It was them. Charlie smiled. "Hi," she whispered, too soft for the others to hear. Before her stood 3 animatronic animals, a bear, a rabbit, and a chicken, all standing as tall as adults, maybe taller. Their bodies were segmented like artist models, each limb made of distinct, squarish pieces. Separate at the joints. They belonged to the restaurant, or maybe the restaurant belonged to them. And there had been a time where everyone knew them by name. There was Bonnie, the rabbit. His fur was a bright blue. His squared-off muzzle held a permanent smile, and his wide and chipped pink eyes were thick-lidded, giving him a perpetually worn-out expression. His ears stuck up straight, crinkling over at the top, and his large feet splayed out for balance. He held a red bass guitar, blue paws poised to play, and around his neck was a bow tie that matched the instrument's fiery color. Chica the chicken was more bulky and had an apprehensive look, thick black eyebrows arching over her purple eyes, and her beak slightly open, revealing teeth as she held out a cupcake on a platter. The cupcake itself was somewhat disturbing, with eyes set to its pink frosting and teeth hanging out over the cake, a single candle sticking out the top. I always expected the cupcake to jump off the plate. Carlton gave a half laugh and cautiously stepped up to Charlie's side. "They seem taller than I remember," he added in a whisper. That's because you never got this close as a kid. Charlie smiled at ease and stepped closer. You were busy hiding under the tables, Jessica said from behind them, still some distance away. Chica wore a bib around her neck with the words, "Let's eat," set out in purple and yellow against a confetti-covered background. A tuft of feathers stuck up in the middle of her head. Standing between Bonnie and Chica was Freddy Fazbear himself, namesake of the restaurant. He was the most genial-looking of the three, seeming at ease where he was. A robust, if lean, brown bear, he smiled down at the audience, holding a microphone in one paw, sporting a black bow tie and top hat. The only incongruity in his features was the color of his eyes, a bright blue that surely no bear had ever had before him. His mouth was hung open, and his eyes were partially closed, as though he had been frozen in song. Carlton drew closer to the stage until his knees pressed against the rim of it. "Hey, Freddy," he whispered. "Long time no see." He reached out and grabbed at the microphone, wiggling it to see if he could get it loose. "Don't!" Charlie blurted, looking up into Freddy's fixed gaze, as though making sure he hadn't noticed. Carlton pulled his hand back like he had touched something hot. "Sorry." "Come on," John said, cracking a smile. "Don't you want to see the rest of the place?" They spread out across the room, peering into corners and carefully trying doors, acting as though everything might be breakable to the touch. John went over to the small carousel, and Carlton disappeared into the dark arcade off the main room. "I remember it being a lot brighter and noisier in here," Carlton smiled, as though at home again, running his hands over the aging knobs and flat plastic buttons. "I wonder if my high scores are still in there," he muttered to himself. To the left of the stage was a small hallway. Half hoping no one would notice where she had gone, Charlie started down it silently, as the others occupied themselves with their own curiosities. At the end of the short, plain corridor was her father's office. It had been Charlie's favorite place in the restaurant. She liked to play with her friends in the main area, but she loved the singular privilege of coming back here when her father was doing paperwork. She paused outside the closed door, her hand poised over the knob, remembering. Most of the room was filled with his desk, his filing cabinets, and small boxes of uninteresting parts. In one corner was a smaller filing cabinet, painted a salmon color that Charlie had always insisted was pink. That had been Charlie's. The bottom drawer held toys and crayons, and the top had what she liked to call my paperwork. It was mostly coloring books and drawings, but occasionally she would go over to her father's desk and try to copy down whatever he was writing in a childish crayon hand. Charlie tried the door, but it was locked. Better this way, she thought. The office was personal, and she did not really want it open tonight. She headed back into the main dining room and found John looking pensively at the merry-go-round. He eyed her with curiosity, but did not ask where she had gone. "I used to love that thing," Charlie smiled, approaching warmly. Yet now the painted figure seemed odd and lifeless to her. John made a face, as though he knew what she was thinking. "Not the same," he said. He rubbed his hand over the top of a polished pony, as though to scratch it behind the ear. "Just not the same," he repeated, removing his hand and gazing elsewhere. Charlie glanced over to see where the others were. In the arcade, she could see Jessica and Carlton wandering among the games. The consoles stood still and unlit like massive tombstones, their screens blank. "I never liked playing the games," Jessica said, smiling. "They moved too fast, and just when I'd start to figure out what to do, I'd die, and it would be someone else's turn." She wiggled a joystick that squeaked from neglect. "They were rigged anyway," Carlton said with a wink. "When's the last time you played one of these?" Jessica asked. peering closely into one of the screens to see what image was burned into it from too many years of use. Carlton was busy rocking a pinball machine back and forth, trying to get a ball to come loose. There's a pizza place I visit sometimes. He set the table back on four legs carefully and glanced at Jessica. But it's no Freddy's, he added. John was roaming through the dining room again amid the tables, flicking the stars and spirals hanging overhead. He plucked a red party hat from the table, stretched the rubber band hanging loosely from its base, and snapped it around his head, red and white tassels hanging down over his face. "Oh, let's check out the kitchen," he said. Charlie followed as he bounded off towards it. Although the kitchen had been off limits to her friends, she'd spent a lot of time there. So much so that the chefs chased her out by name, or at least by the name they heard her father call her, Charlotte. John overheard someone calling her Charlotte one day when they were in the kindergarten, and persisted in teasing her with it constantly. He could always get a rise out of her with that. It wasn't that Charlie didn't like her full name, but Charlie was who she was to the world. Her father called her Charlotte, and it was like a secret between them. Something no one else was allowed to share. The day she left Hurricane for good, the day she said goodbye. John had hesitated. "Bye, Charlie," he said. In their cards, letters, and phone calls, he had never called her Charlotte again. She never asked why, and he never told her. The kitchen was still fully stocked with pots and pans, but it held little interest for Charlie in the midst of her memories. She headed back out into the open space of the dining room, and John followed. At the same time, Jessica and Carlton stumbled out of the arcade, tripping into each other as they crossed the thresholds between rooms in the dark. "Anything interesting?" John asked. A gum wrapper, 30 cents, and Jessica, so not really," Carlton said. Jessica playfully gave him a punch on the shoulder. "Oh, have we all forgotten?" Jessica gave an evil smile, pointing to another hallway on the opposite side of the dining room. She headed toward it swiftly before anyone could answer, and they followed her. The hallway was long and narrow, and the farther they went, the less flashlights seemed to illuminate. At last the passage opened out into a small room for private parties, set up with its own tables and chairs. As they entered, there was a collective hush. There in front of them was a small stage, the curtain drawn. A sign was strung across the front, "Out of order." It read in neat, handwritten letters. They stood still for a moment. Then Jessica went up to it and poked the sign. "Pirates' Cove," she said. 10 years later, and it's still out of order. "Don't touch it," Charlie thought. "I had one birthday back here," John said. "It was out of order then, too." He took hold of the edge of the curtain and rubbed the glittered fabric between his fingers. "No," Charlie wanted to say again, but stop. "You're being silly," she chided off. "Do you think he's still back there?" Jessica said playfully, threatening to make the reveal with one giant swing of the curtain. "I'm sure he is." John gave a false smile, seeming uncomfortable for the first time. Yes, he's still there, Charlie thought. She stepped back cautiously, suddenly becoming aware of the drawings and posters surrounding them like spiders on the wall. Charlie's flashlight carefully inched from picture to picture, all depicting different variations of the same character. A large and energetic pirate fox with a patch over one eye and a hook for a hand, usually swinging in to deliver pizza to hungry children. "This is the room where you were the one hiding under tables," Jessica said to Charlie, trying to laugh. "But you're a big girl now, right?" Jessica climbed on the stage unsteadily, almost losing her footing. John reached out a hand to steady her as she righted herself. She giggled nervously, looking down at the others as though for guidance, then grabbed hold of the tasseled edge of the fabric. She waved her other hand in front of her face as dust fell from the cloth. Maybe this isn't a good idea, she laughed, but there was an edge to her voice, like she really meant it, and she looked down at the stage for a moment, as though poised to climb back down. Still, she didn't move, taking the edge of the curtain again. "Wait," John said. "Can you hear that?" They were all dead quiet, and in the silence, Charlie could hear them all breathing. John's breaths were deliberate and calm, Jessica's quick and nervous. As she thought about it, her own breathing again began to feel odd, like she had forgotten how to do it. "I don't hear anything," she said. "Me neither," Jessica echoed. "What is it?" "Music. It's coming from—" He gestured back the way they had come. "From the stage?" Charlie cocked her head to the side. "I don't hear it. It's like a music box," he said. Charlie and Jessica listened carefully, but their blank expressions didn't change. "It stopped, I guess." John returned his gaze forward. "Maybe it was an ice cream truck," Jessica whispered. "Hey, that wouldn't be so bad right now." John appreciated the levity. Jessica turned her attention back to the curtain, but John began to hum a tune to himself. "It reminded me of something," he mumbled. "Okay, here I go," Jessica announced. She did not move. Charlie found her eyes drawn to Jessica's hand on the curtain, her pink, manicured nails pale against the dark, glittery fabric. It was almost like the hushed moment in a theater crowd when the lights went dark, but the curtain had not yet risen. They were all still, all anticipating, but they were not watching a play, no longer playing a game. All the mirth had gone out of Jessica's face. Her cheekbones stood out stark in the shadows, and her eyes looked grim, as though the simple thing she was about to do might be of terrible consequence. As Jessica hesitated, Charlie realized her hand hurt. She was making a fist so tight her nails dug into her flesh, but she could not force her grip to loosen. A crash sounded from back the way they came, a cascading, clanging noise ringing out and filling the whole space. John and Charlie froze, meeting each other's eyes in sudden panic. Jessica dropped the curtain and leaped off the stage, bumping into Charlie and knocking the light out of her hands. "Where's the way out?" she exclaimed, and John came over to help. They hurriedly searched the walls, and Charlie chased the light beams spiraling across the floor. Just as they were all back to their feet, Carlton came trotting in. "I knocked over a bunch of pots in the kitchen," he exclaimed, an apology amid the panic. "I thought you were with us," Charlie said. "I wanted to see if there was any food left," Carlton said, not making it clear if he'd found anything or not. "Seriously?" John laughed. "That guard might have heard us," Jessica said anxiously. "We have to get out of here." They started for the door, and Jessica started running. The rest took off after her, picking up speed as they reached the hallway until they were racing as though something was behind them. "Run! Run!" John called out, and they all burst into giggles, the panic feigned but the urgency real. They squeezed back through the door one by one and pushed it shut with the same painful squeal, Carlton and John leaning on it until it sealed. They all took hold of the shelf, hefting it back into place and replacing the tools so that it appeared undisturbed. "Looks good," Jessica said, and John tugged her arm, guiding her away. They made their way quickly but carefully back the way they came, using only Carlton's penlight, back through the empty hallways and the open atrium to the parking lot. The guard's light did not appear again. "Little anticlimactic," Carlton said with disappointment, checking back one more time in hopes they were being chased. "Are you kidding?" Charlie said as she went to her car, already pulling the keys free from her pocket. She felt as though something locked deep inside her had been disturbed, and she was not sure if that was a good thing or not. "That was fun!" John exclaimed, and Jessica laughed. "That was terrifying!" she cried. It can be both, Carlton said, grinning widely. Charlie began to laugh, and John joined in. What? Jessica said. Charlie shook her head, still laughing a little. It's just, we're all exactly the same as we were. I mean, we're totally different and older and everything, but we're the same. You and Carlton sound exactly like you did when you were 6. Right? Jessica said, rolling her eyes again, but John nodded. I know what you mean, he said, and so does Jessica. She just doesn't like to admit it. He glanced back at the mall. Is everybody sure that guard didn't see us? We can outrun him now, Carlton said reasonably, his hand resting on the car. I guess, John said, but he did not sound convinced. You haven't changed either, you know, Jessica said with a certain satisfaction. Stop looking for problems where there aren't any. Still, John said, glancing back again, we should get out of here. I don't want to push our luck. See you all tomorrow, then? Jessica said as they parted ways. Carlton gave a little wave over his shoulder. Charlie's heart sank a little as Jessica settled herself into the passenger seat, tidily buckling herself in. She had not been looking forward to this. It wasn't that she didn't like Jessica, just that being alone with her was uncomfortable. She still wasn't much more than a stranger, yet Charlie was still exhilarated from the night's adventure, and the lingering adrenaline gave her a new confidence. She smiled at Jessica. After tonight, they suddenly had something very much in common. Do you know which way the motel is? She asked, and Jessica nodded and reached for her purse down at her feet. It was small and black, with a long strap, and on the drive to the construction site, Charlie had already seen her remove a lip gloss, a mirror, a pack of breath mints, a sewing kit, and a tiny hairbrush. Now, she pulled out a small notebook and pen. Charlie smiled. Sorry, how much stuff do you have in that thing? She asked, and Jessica looked at her with a grin. The secrets of the purse must not be disclosed, she said playfully, and they both laughed. Jessica started reading Charlie the directions, and Charlie obeyed, turning left and right without paying much attention to her surroundings. Jessica had already checked in, so they went straight to their room, a small beige box of a room with 2 double beds covered in shiny brown spreads. Charlie set her bags on the bed closest to the door, and Jessica went to the window. As you can see, I splurged on the room with the view, she said, and flung the curtains open dramatically to reveal 2 dumpsters and a dried-out hedge. I want to have my wedding here. Right, Charlie said, amused. Jessica's prim demeanor and fashion model looks made it easy to forget that she was smart as well. As a child, she remembered being slightly intimidated every time they got together to play before realizing after the first few minutes how much she liked Jessica. She wondered if it was hard for Jessica to make friends, looking the way she did. But it wasn't the kind of thing you could really ask someone. Jessica flopped down on the bed, lying across it to face Charlie. So tell me about you, she said confidently, mocking a talk show host or someone's nosy mother. Charlie shrugged awkwardly, put on the spot. What does that mean? Jessica laughed. I don't know. What an awful thing to ask, right? I mean, how do you answer that? How about school? Any cute boys? Charlie lay down across the bed, mimicking Jessica's position. Cute boys? What are we, 12? Well, Jessica said impatiently. I don't know, she said. Not really. Her class was too small. She had known most of the people in it since she moved in with Aunt Jen, and dating anyone, liking them like that, seemed forced and altogether unappealing. She told Jessica as much. Most of the girls, if they want to date, they date older guys, she said. And you don't have an older guy? Jessica teased. Nah, Charlie said. I figured I'd wait around for our batch to grow up. Right, Jessica burst out laughing before quickly thinking of something to share. Last year, there was this guy, Donnie, she said. I was gaga for him, like really. He was so sweet to everyone. He wore all black all the time, and he had this black curly hair, so thick, all I could think about when I sat behind him was burying my face in it. I was so distracted, I ended up with an A- in trig. He was super artistic, a poet, and he carried around one of those black leather notebooks, and he was always scribbling something in it. But he would never show anybody. She sighed dreamily. I figured if I could get him to show me his poetry, I would really come to know his soul, you know? So, did he ever? Charlie said. Oh, yeah, she said, nodding empathetically. Oh, emphatically. My apologies. I asked him out finally, because he was shy and he was never going to ask me. And we went to the movies and made out a little. And then we went and hung out on the roof of his apartment building. And I told him all about how I want to study ancient civilizations and go on archaeological digs and stuff. And he showed me his poems. And did you come to know his soul? Charlie said, excited to be included in girl talk, something she felt like she'd never really gotten to participate in before. Charlie nodded eagerly, but not too eagerly. She calmed herself as Jessica scooted forward on the bed to whisper. The poems were awful. I didn't know it was possible to be both melodramatic and boring at the same time. I mean, just reading them made me embarrassed for him. She covered her face in her hands. Charlie laughed. What did you do? What could I do? I told him it wasn't going to work out and went home. Wait, right after you read his poetry? I still had the notebook in my hand. Oh no, Jessica, that's awful. You must have broken his heart. I know, I felt so bad, but it was like the words just came out of my mouth. I couldn't stop myself. Did he ever speak to you again? Oh yeah, he's perfectly nice, but now he takes statistics and economics and wears sweater vests. You broke him! Charlie threw a pillow at Jessica, who sat up and caught it. I know! He'll probably be a millionaire stockbroker instead of a starving artist, and it's all my fault, she grinned. Come on, he'll thank me someday. Charlie shook her head. Do you really want to be an archaeologist? Yeah. Huh, said Charlie. Sorry, I thought... She shook her head. Sorry, that is really cool. You thought I want to do something in fashion, Jessica said. Well, yeah. It's okay, Jessica said. I did too. I do. I love fashion, but there's only so much to it, you know? I think it's amazing to think about how people lived thousands of years ago, or 2,000, or 10. They were just like us, but so different. I like to imagine in other times, other places, wonder who I would have been. Anyway, what about you? Charlie rolled over onto her back, looking up at the ceiling. The tiles were made of loose, stained styrofoam, and the one above her head was askew. I hope there aren't any bugs up in there, she thought. I don't know, she said slowly. I think it's really cool that you know who you want to be, but I've just never had that kind of plan. Well, it's not like you have to figure it out now, Jessica said. Maybe, Charlie said, but I don't know. You know what you want to do. John's known since he could hold a pencil that he wanted to be a writer, and he's already getting published. Even Carlton. I don't know what he has planned, but you can just see that there's a scheme brewing behind all his kidding around. But I just don't have that kind of direction. It really doesn't matter, Jessica said. I don't think most people know at our age. Plus, I might change my mind, or not even get into college or something. You never know what's going to happen. Hey, I'm going to get changed. I want to get some sleep. She went into the bathroom, and Charlie stayed where she was, gazing at the sorry-looking ceiling. She supposed it was becoming a defect, her earnest refusal to consider the past or future. Live in the present moment, her Aunt Jen said often, and Charlie had taken it to heart. Don't dwell on the past. Don't worry about things that may never happen. In 8th grade, she had taken a shop class, vaguely hoping the mechanical work might spark something of her father's talent, might unleash some inherited passion lying latent within her. But it had not. She had made a clumsy-looking birdhouse for the backyard. She never took another shop class, and the birdhouse only attracted one squirrel who promptly knocked it down. Jessica came out of the bedroom wearing pink striped pajamas, and Charlie went in to get ready for bed, changing and brushing her teeth hurriedly. When she came out again, Jessica was already under the covers with the light by her bed turned off. Charlie turned hers off too, but the light from the parking lot still shone in from the windows, somehow filtering past the dumpsters. Charlie stared up at the ceiling again, her hands behind her head. "Do you know what's going to happen tomorrow?" she asked. "I don't really know," Jessica said. "I know it's a ceremony at the school." "Yeah, I know that," Charlie said. "Are we going to have to do anything? Like, do they want us to speak?" "I don't think so," Jessica said. "Why? Do you want to say something?" "No, I was just wondering." "Do you ever think about him?" Jessica asked. "Sometimes. I try not to," Charlie said half-truthfully. She had sealed off this subject of Michael in her mind, locked him tight behind a mental wall she never touched. It was an effort to avoid the subject, in fact. It was an effort to think of him now. "What about you?" she asked Jessica. "Not really," she said. "It's weird, right? Something happens, and it's the worst thing you can ever imagine, and it's just burned into you at the time, like it's going to go on forever, and then the years go by, and it's just another thing that happened. Not like it's important or terrible, but it's in the past, just as much as everything else, you know?" "I guess," Charlie said, but she did know. "I just try not to think about those things." "Me too. You know, I just went to a funeral last week." "I'm sorry," Charlie said, sitting up. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine," Jessica said. "I barely even knew him. He was just an old relative who lived 3 states away. I think I met him once, but I hardly remember it. We mostly went for my mom's sake. But it was an old-fashioned funeral parlor, like in the movies, with an open coffin. And we all walked by the coffin, and when it was my turn, I looked at him, and he could have been sleeping, you know? Just calm and restful, like people always say dead people look. There was nothing that I could have pointed out that made me think dead. If you asked me, every feature of his face looked the same, as if he were alive. His skin was the same, his hair was the same, as if he were alive. But he wasn't alive. And I just knew it. I would have known it immediately, even if he wasn't. You know, it's a coffin. I know what you mean. There is something about them when they're... Charlie said softly. It sounds stupid when I say it, but when I looked at him, he looked so alive, and yet I knew, just knew, that he wasn't. It made my skin crawl. That's the worst thing, isn't it? Charlie said. Things that act alive but aren't. What? Jessica said. I mean, things that look alive but aren't, Charlie said quickly. We should get some sleep. Did you set the alarm? Yes, Jessica said. Good night. Night. Charlie knew sleep was still a long way off. She knew what Jessica meant, probably better than Jessica did. The artificial shine in eyes that followed you as you moved, just like a real person's would. The slight lurch of realistic animals who did not move the way a living thing should. The occasional programming glitch that made a robot appear to have done something new, creative. Her childhood had been filled with them. She had grown up in the strange gap between life and not life. It had been her world. It had been her father's world. Charlie closed her eyes. What did that world do to him? And that's chapter 2.
Oh man.
That was a long boy.
Ugh, what a mouthful.
Yeesh.
Oh geez, that was long.
Yeah, no kidding.
That was long, but gosh dang, it was good.
Yeah, that was honestly a really good chapter.
Yes.
Lord have mercy.
I want to see how long chapter 3 is.
A little longer than
What?
It's even longer.
Oh shit.
Oh boy.
How much longer?
Let me
I'm
see.
going with the second editions. Let's
Oh,
see.
I found it. Yeah, it starts on page 82 and it ends at 125.
Yeah, boy.
So about 40 pages.
Oh boy. Oh fuck.
Let's take a break before we dive
Yeah.
into the.
Let's take a quick break.
Oh,
I'll be right back.
Alright.
I agree.
Oh man.
Ugh.
I'm so glad I have that bookmark now. Oh boy. Gotta mentally prepare for this.
You got this, Elliot. I am so sorry. I didn't realize how long they were.
No, it's okay. Just god dang.
Next time, do you want to just do 2 pages and we can go by, like, you read so many pages and then the next person goes?
Maybe.
Page roulette or something?
I guess.
Elias, I honestly do agree that chapter 2 was actually better than chapter 1.
Oh yeah, no. Chapter 2, you know, introducing Fazbear's Pizza as this, like, abandoned location that's just been built around was honestly really cool. The descriptions
Yeah.
of all the animatronics, the sort of rustic feel of the pizzeria, it felt so eerie but inviting, you know?
Yeah.
It felt like it could pull you in but creep you out all at once.
Definitely. Oh man.
Oh, my throat.
So far, everyone's done a really good job, and I do think maybe I'm gonna go through the pages and we just kind of figure out what ones we want to do and do like a roulette of pages.
Yeah, maybe next time we'll shorten it to 2 chapters and just roulette this son of a gun.
Yeah.
Oh.
Drink your water.
Well, I am. I got 2 bottles of water right next to me.
Oh, why we wait? Chat. You guys got any little questions for any of the amazing people that are in here? My hand is hurting, so I might honestly take a break from drawing.
Yeah, rest your hand, please.
Yes, please, baby. We don't want you hurting yourself. Especially not me.
You all are gonna see me tomorrow in a cast like, this is what it did to me.
So, what about Paula cast?
Her hands hurting.
Yeah. And I said drawing in the final chapter. I will say, let's leave anything that involves Crow and anything else out of this stream, if that's okay. This is for the amazing people who are sitting reading for almost an hour to enjoy reading this to you. So nothing, any Let's Play wise, Deep in Homebrew wise, Crow wise, just keep it to Fnaf Silver Eyes or the people in here in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kiari asks, Anne, what have you been working on recently?
So these beautiful people have seen what I've been working on. A lot.
Yes, and I can't wait. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, it's gonna be amazing.
I'm doing so much of it myself, and I'm very happy with how it's turning out so far.
You should be. It's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, how did you guys come up with this idea of reading this book? I like this idea.
Okay. I guess long story short of it, I like books. As much as I love animation and comics, I like books. And I remember when I was younger how my English teacher always gave us some boring ass books for English class. And
Well, do you remember some of those books?
The Grapes of I can't knock it, but the Grapes of Wrath only because our English teacher made us skip like several chapters at a time and never went back to them. So, For me, there was that one. Then there was this other one I can't remember the name of, but it was like one of those that just put you to sleep. But I kind of sitting there thinking because I recently grabbed some of my books and stuff from my grandfather's place when I was staying there for a while, and one of them was the Fnaf. And one thing I really like wanted to do was get people into reading because I like books and I love people read. Like
Sadly, no.
yeah. So I figured let's make it fun. Let's do books that I feel like people might enjoy. So Fnaf, since I had all three, plus the workshop, plus all the other ones.
Yeah.
I thought this would be a good start to see if people liked it, and then maybe later on we could try to get like maybe Lord of the Flies or Frankenstein.
Okay, I actually really like the Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the Flies looked baller. That was one of the
Lord of the
best
Flies
Like-
is great.
These are the books. These are the books I remember reading in high school. The Great Gatsby.
Oh, the
Which-
Great Gatsby. Yes.
It's such a good book. Great
Yeah.
Gatsby, Lord of the Flies, and Something Wicked This Way Comes.
I think it's
Oh, you
that
lucky,
one.
you lucky bastard.
Something Wicked is really good.
Nice.
I never got to read that, you bastard. We were gonna, but then the school decided
Well-
to take it off the reading thing.
Cause like the thing is, my teacher at that time gave like was like, oh, these are a list of books that you can read. Like one of them was Ender's Game. There was
Oh, I read Ender's Game.
Something
I
Wicked.
love that book.
Like there was a whole list that we were all able to choose from, and I saw Something Wicked, and me in high school still into my horror. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna get it.
But yeah, this is one of the main things I wanted to do because like I remember like good books, but I also remember the shitty ones that our school made us read. And with my brother, they completely changed the reading requirements up at that school, and they give him really bad books. So he hates reading. So I want to kind of try to bring that back by hopefully reading books people like with all these amazing people. Because my reading's shit. I can't read out loud for the life of me.
Okay, well, I feel it's good to get into chapter 3.
All right.
Yep, let's do this.
You got this, Elliot. Make sure to drink water beforehand and during.
I have it. I've been drinking water this entire time.
Good.
Yeah,
Don't make the
drink
mistake
your
I did.
water.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, this is a long boy still, but
You've got this.
You got the long boy.
Everyone press E in the chat to root for Elliot.
okay. Thud. 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 Charlie startled out of sleep, disoriented. Something was banging on her door, trying to force its way in. Oh, for goodness sake, Jessica said grumpily, and Charlie blinked and sat up. Right. The motel. Hurricane. Someone was knocking on the door. As Jessica went to answer the door, Charlie got out of bed and looked at the clock. It was 10 a.m. She looked out the window at the bright new day. She had slept worse than usual. Not nightmares, but dark dreams she could not quite remember. Things that stuck with her, just beyond the back of her mind. Images she could not catch. Charlie! Someone was screeching. Charlie went to the door and found herself immediately enveloped in a hug, Marla's plump arms gripping her like a vice. Charlie hugged her back, tighter than she meant to. When Marla let go, she stepped back, grinning. Marla's moods had always been so intense they were contagious, spreading out to whoever was in her path. When she was gloomy, a pall fell over all her friends. The sun gone behind her cloud. When she was happy, like now, it was impossible to avoid the lift of her joy. She was always breathless, always slightly scattered, always giving the impression that she was running late, though she almost never was. Marla was wearing a loose, dark red blouse, and it suited her well, setting off her. Oh God, I thought the stream died. I got scared.
Oh no, it's all good. It's all good. Keep going.
Marla was wearing a loose, dark red blouse, and it suited her well, setting off her fair skin and dark brown hair. Charlie had kept in better touch with Marla than others. Marla was the type who made it easy to stay friends, even at a distance. Even as a little kid, she was always sending letters and postcards, undeterred if Charlie didn't respond to every one. She was resolutely positive and assumed that everyone liked her unless they made it clear otherwise, using the proper expletives. Charlie admired it about her. She herself, though not shy, was always calculating. Does that person like me? Are they just being polite? How do people tell the difference? Marla had come to visit her once when they were 12. She had charmed Charlie's aunt. She had charmed Charlie's aunt and made fast friends with her school friends while still making it abundantly clear that she was Charlie's friend, and she was there only to see Charlie. Marla's gigantic smile turned serious as she studied Charlie, peering at her as if trying to spot the differences since they last met. You're as pale as ever. She took Charlie's hands in her own. And you're all clammy. Don't you ever get warm? She dropped Charlie's hands and proceeded to study the motel rooms skeptically, as though uncertain exactly what it was. It's the luxury suite, Jessica said without expression as she searched for something in her bag. Her hair was sticking up in all directions, and Charlie stifled a smile. It was nice to see something about Jessica in disarray for once. Jessica found her hairbrush and held it up triumphantly. Ha! Take that, Morning Frizz! Come on in, Charlie said, realizing she and Marla were still in the doorway, the door wide open. Marla nodded. One sec. Jason! She shouted out the door. No one emerged. Jason! A young boy came trotting up from the road. He was short and wiry, darker skinned than his half-sister. His Batman t-shirt and black shorts were made for someone twice his size. His hair was cut close to his head, and his arms and legs were streaked with dirt. Were you playing in the road? Marla demanded. No, he said. Yes, you were. Don't do that. If you get yourself killed, Mom's gonna blame me. Get inside. Marla shoved her little brother inside and shook her head. How old are you now? Charlie asked. 11, Jason said. He went to the TV and started fiddling with the buttons. Jason, stop it, Marla said. Play with your action figures. I'm not a little kid, he said. Anyway, they're in the car. But he stepped away from the television and went to look out the window. Marla rubbed his eyes. We just got here. We had to leave at 6 this morning, and someone, she said pointedly, glancing over her shoulder at Jason, wouldn't stop fiddling with the radio. I'm so tired. She didn't seem tired, but then she never did. Where are there motorcycles right now? Like, there are motorcycles right now, and I hate it.
No, the motorcycle curse!
Motorcycles?
Motorcycles!
At their sleepovers as kids, Charlie remembered her bouncing around like a maniac while the rest of them were winding down for the night, then falling asleep abruptly, like a cartoon character who'd been hit over the head with a rolling pin. We should get ready, Jessica said. We're supposed to meet the guys at the diner in an hour. Hurry, Marla said. We have to change too. I didn't want to get all gross while we were driving. Jason, you go watch TV, Charlie said, and he looked at Marla. She nodded, and he grinned and turned it on, starting to flip channels. Please just pick a channel, Marla said. Charlie headed into the bathroom to get dressed, while Jessica fussed with her hair. A little less than an hour later, they pulled into the diner parking lot. The others were already there, in the same booth they'd been in the night before. When they got inside, Marla performed a second round of squeals and hugs, only slightly quieter now that they were in public. Overshadowed by her enthusiasm, Lamar stood up and waved at Jessica and Charlie, waiting until Marla sat down. "Hi, guys," he said at last. He was wearing a dark tie and a dark gray suit. He was tall and thin, black, with his hair shaved close to his head. His features were sharp and attractive, and he looked just a little older than the rest of them. It could have been the suit, but Charlie thought it was something about the way he stood, holding himself like he would be comfortable wherever he was. They had all dressed up a little for the ceremony. Marla changed at the motel, and she and Jessica were both wearing dresses. Jessica's was knee-length and covered in pastel flowers, a light fabric that moved as she walked. Marla's was simple, white with big sunflowers splashed over it. Charlie hadn't thought to bring a dress, and she hoped she didn't look out of place in black pants and a white button-down shirt. John was wearing a light purple shirt today, though he'd added a matching tie in a slightly darker color. And Carlton seemed to be wearing an identical outfit as before, still all black. They all sat down. "Well, don't we all look nice?" Marla said happily. "Where's Jason?" Jessica craned her head over from side to side. Marla groaned. "I'll be right back." She scooted out of the booth and hurried out the door. "Lamar, what have you been up to?" Charlie asked. Lamar grinned. "He's an Ivy League man," Carlton said, teasing. Lamar looked briefly down at the table, but he was smiling. "Early acceptance," was all he said. "Which one?" Jessica said. "Cornell?" "Wait, how did you already apply to college?" Charlie said. "That's not till next year. I don't even know where I want to go." "He skipped 6th grade," John said. There was a brief flicker of something across his face, and Charlie knew what it was. Charlie liked being the clever one, the precocious one. Lamar had been kind of a goof-off when they were kids, and now he had leapt ahead. John forced a grin, and the moment passed. "Congratulations," he said, with no hint that it was not entirely sincere. Marla came bursting in again, this time towing Jason behind her, holding on to his upper arm. At the hotel, she had made him change as well as into a blazer and khakis, though he was still wearing his Nikes. "I'm coming, stop it," he whined. "Is that Jason?" Carlton said. "Yeah," Jason said. "Do you remember me?" Carlton said. "I don't remember any of you," Jason said unapologetically. "Sit there," Marla said, pointing to the next booth over. "Okay," he grumbled. "Marla, he can sit with us," Jessica said. "Jason, come on over." "I want to sit here," he said, and sat down behind them. He pulled a video game out of his pocket and was oblivious to the world. The waitress came over, and they ordered. Marla told her to put Jason's breakfast on their check. When their food came, Charlie checked her watch. "We don't have a lot of time," she said. "We'll get there," Carlton said. "It's not far." A small piece of food fell out of his mouth as he gestured down the road. "Have you been back to the school?" Lamar asked, and Carlton shrugged. "I pass it sometimes. I know this is a nostalgia trip for all of you, but I just live here. I don't exactly go around reminiscing about kindergarten all the time." They were all quiet for a second, the beeps and pings of Jason's video game filling the silence. "Hey, did you know Lamar's going to Cornell next year?" Jessica said to Marla. "Really? Well, aren't you ahead of the pack?" she said. He looked down at his plate. When he looked up, he was a little flushed. "All part of his 5-year plan," he said. They laughed, and his blush deepened. "It's kind of weird to be back here," he said, hastily changing the subject. I think it's strange that I'm the only one who still lives here, Carlton said. Nobody ever leaves Hurricane. Is it strange, though? Jessica said thoughtfully. My parents, you remember, my mom's from New York originally. She used to joke about going back. When I go back to New York, but it might as well have been when I win the lottery. She didn't mean it. And then right after, she stopped joking about it. Then 3 months later, we were all on a plane to visit her sister in Queens, and we never came back. My dad's father died when I was 9, and they came back to Hurricane for the funeral without me. They didn't want me coming back here, and honestly, I didn't want to go. I was kind of anxious the whole time they were gone. I kept looking out the window, hoping they would come back early, like something bad was going to happen to them if they stayed. They looked at each other, considering. Charlie knew they had all moved, all but Carlton, but she had never thought about it. People moved all the time. Carlton was right, though. People didn't leave Hurricane. We moved because my dad got a new job, the summer after 3rd grade, John said. That's not exactly mysterious, Lamar. You left in the middle of the semester that year. Yeah, he said. But that's because when my parents split, I went with my mom to Indianapolis. He frowned. But my dad moved too. He's in Chicago now. My parents left because of Michael, Marla said. They all turned to her. Afterward, my mom couldn't sleep. She said spirits were stirring in the town, unquiet. My dad told her she was being ridiculous, but we still left as fast as we could. Oh, okay, yeah, you could pass. That's fine. Fucking motorcycle?
Kaiser's laughing and you know my pain.
Others now understand my suffering.
I've known your suffering for a while.
Oh, I know, it's horrible, isn't it?
Yeah.
I want to give you both a hug.
Marla looked around at her friends. What? She said defensively. I don't believe in ghosts. I do, Charlie said. She felt like she was talking from a great distance. She was almost surprised they could hear her. I mean, not ghosts, but memories. I think they linger, whether there's someone there or not. The house, her old house, was imbued with memory. With loss, with longing. It hung in the air like humidity. The walls were saturated, like the wood had soaked in it. It had been there before she came, and it was there now. It would be there forever. It had to be. There was too much, too great and a vast weight for Charlie to have brought in with her. That doesn't make any sense. Jessica said. Memory is in our brains, like literally stored in the brain. You can see it on the scan. It can't exist outside of someone's mind. I don't know, John said. Think of all the places that have atmosphere. Old houses, sometimes. Places where you walk in and you feel sad or nostalgic, even though you've never been there before. That's not other people's memories, though, Gomar said. That's subconscious cues, stuff we don't realize we're noticing. That tells us we should feel some way. Peeling paint, old-fashioned furniture, lace curtains, details that tell us to be nostalgic. Mostly things we pick up from movies, probably. I got lost in a carnival when I was 4. I never got so scared in my life. But I don't think anybody's feeling suddenly desperate for their mom when they pass that Ferris wheel. Maybe they are, Marla said. I don't know. Sometimes I have little moments where it's like there's something I forgot, something I regret, or that I'm happy about, or something that makes me want to cry. But it's only there for a split second, then it's gone. Maybe we're all shedding our fear and regret and hope everywhere we go, and we're catching up traces of people we've never met. Maybe it's everywhere. How is that different from believing in ghosts? Lamar asked. It's totally different, Marla said. It's not supernatural, and it's not like the souls of dead people. It's just people leaving their mark on the world. So it's ghosts of living people, Glomar said. No. You're talking about people having some kind of essence that can hang around a specific place after the person is gone, Glomar said. That's a ghost. No, it's not. I'm not saying it right, Marla said. She closed her eyes for a minute, thinking. Okay, she said at last. Do you all remember my grandmother? I do, said Jason. She was my grandmother, too. She was my dad's mom, not yours, Marla said. Anyway, you were only a year old when she died. I do remember her, Jason said quietly. Okay, Marla said. So, she collected dolls from the time she was a kid. She and my grandmother used to travel a lot after he retired, and she'd bring them back from all over the world. She had them from France, Egypt, Italy, Brazil, China, everywhere. She kept them in their own special room, and it was full of them. Shelves and shelves of dolls, some tiny and some almost as big as I was. I loved it. One of my earliest memories is playing in that room with the dolls. I remember my dad would always warn me to be careful, and my grandmother would laugh and say, "Toys should be played with." I had a favorite 21-inch red-haired doll in a short, shiny white dress like Shirley Temple. I called her Maggie. She was from the 1940s, and I loved her. I told her everything, and when I was lonely, I would imagine myself in that room, playing with Maggie. My grandmother died when I was 6, and when my dad and I went to see my grandfather after the funeral, he told me I should pick a doll to keep from the collection. I went to the room to get Maggie, and as soon as I walked through the door, something was wrong. It was as though the light had changed, become darker, harsher than it used to be. I looked around, and the lively, playful poses of the dolls now seemed unnatural, disjointed. It was as though all of them were staring at me. I didn't know what they wanted. Maggie was in the corner, and I took a step toward her, and stopped. I met her eyes, and instead of painted glass, I saw a stranger. I turned and ran. I raced down the hall as though something might be chasing me, not daring to look back until I reached my father's side. He asked if I had picked a doll, and I just shook my head. I never went back in that room. Everyone was silent. Charlie was transfixed, still seeing little Marla running for her life. What happened to the dolls? Carlton asked, only half breaking the spell. I don't know. I think my mom sold them to another collector when my grandfather died, Marla said. Sorry, Marla, Lamar said. It's still just tricks of the mind. You missed your grandmother. You were frightened of death, and dolls are inherently freaky. Charlie broke in, wanting to head off the argument. Is everybody done eating? We have to go soon. We still have plenty of time, Carlton said, looking down at his watch. It's like 5 minutes away. Something else fell out of his mouth, landing next to the first dropped bit of food. John looked around the table from person to person, as though he were waiting for something. We have to tell them, he said, looking at Charlie. Oh yeah, we totally do, Jessica said. Tell us what? Jason piped up, peeking over the back of Marla's seat. Shh, Marla said half-heartedly. She was looking at John. Tell us what? John dropped his voice, forcing everyone to lean in closer. Charlie did it too, eager to hear, even though she knew exactly what he was going to say. "We went to Freddy's last night," he said. "Freddy's is still there?" Marla exclaimed, too loud. "Shh," Jessica said, making frantic hand movements. "Sorry," Marla whispered. "I just can't believe it's still there." "It's not," Carlton said, raising his eyebrows and grinning enigmatically at Lamar. "It's hidden," John explained. "They were supposed to knock it down to build a mall, but they didn't. They just built around it." "Entombed it," John corrected. "And you got in?" Lamar said. Charlie nodded confirmation. "No way." "What was it like?" Marla asked. Exactly the same," John said. It was like everyone vanished," Charlie said softly. "I want to go too. You have to take us," Marla said. Jessica cleared her throat hesitantly, and they all looked at her. "I don't know," she said slowly. "I mean, today? Should we?" "We have to see it," Lamar said. "You can't tell us this and not let us see it." "I want to see it," Jason chimed in. "What's Freddy's?" They ignored him. His eyes were wide and he was hanging on to every word. "Maybe Jessica's right," John said with reluctance. "Maybe it's disrespectful to go tonight." There was a moment's pause, and Charlie knew they were waiting for her to talk. She was the one they were really afraid of offending. They needed her permission. "I think we should go," she said. "I don't think it's disrespectful. It's almost a way of honoring what happened." She looked around the table. Jessica was nodding. Charlie wasn't sure it was much of an argument, but they didn't need to be convinced. They wanted an excuse. Marla twisted herself to look back at Jason's plate. "Are you done eating?" she asked. "Yep," he said. Marla pointed to the game in his hand. "You know you can't play with that during the ceremony," she said. "Yep. I'm serious, Jason. I'm locking it in the car." "Why don't you just lock me in the car?" he muttered. "I'd love to," Marla said under her breath as she turned back to the group. "Okay, we can go." They headed to the school in a caravan, the boys in Carlton's car, Marla following, and Charlie bringing up the rear. "We should have carpooled," Jessica said idly, staring out the window. It hadn't occurred to Charlie. "I guess," she said. "On the other hand, I'm not sure I want to ride with Marla and Jason," Jessica said plainly. "They're kind of intense," Charlie agreed. When they arrived, the parking lot was already jammed full. Charlie parked on a side street in what she hoped was a legal spot, and they walked to the school along with the familiar sidewalk. Jessica shivered. "I've got goosebumps." "It is weird to be here," Charlie said. The school looked unchanged from the outside, but the fence was new and slick, a black plastic-coated chain link. The whole town was like this, a mix of old and new, familiar and not. The things that had changed seemed out of place, and the things that had remained the same made Charlie feel out of place. "Must be so strange for Colin to live here," she thought. "This is a nostalgia trip for you, but I just live here," he had said. Somehow, Charlie was not sure she believed that. When they got to the playing field behind the school, the bleachers were already full. Rows of folding chairs had been laid out in front of them to add more seating. Charlie spotted Marla and the boys at the front. "Oh, oh, great," she said. "I don't want to sit in the front row." "I don't mind," Jessica said. Charlie looked at her. "Of course you don't," she wanted to say. "You're... you." "Yeah," she said instead. "No big deal. Half the town must be here," she observed as they made their way to the group, where 2 seats had been saved. There was one open in the front row, next to Carlton, and one right behind it, beside Marla. Jessica winked at Charlie and sat down next to Carlton. She leaned toward him, and they started whispering. Charlie repeated to herself to Marla, "There's a lot of people here." "Yeah," Marla said. "I mean, it's a small town, you know? Michael's... It was a big deal. Plus his parents still live here. People remember." "People remember," Charlie echoed softly. There was a small raised stage set up in front of them, with a podium and 4 chairs. Behind the chairs, a screen was suspended. Projected on it was a larger-than-life picture of Michael. It was a close-up, just his face. It was not the most flattering picture. His head was thrown back at an odd angle, his mouth open in laughter. But it was perfect. A joyful moment, snatched up and kept. Not curated. He looked happy. "Darn it," Marla said softly. Charlie looked at her. She was dabbing at her eyes with the tissue. Charlie put an arm around her. "I know," she said. The sound system came on suddenly with a whine that slowly faded. 4 people walked on stage. A heavy-set man in a suit who went straight to the microphone, an elderly woman, and a couple, a man and a woman. The man in the suit stepped up to the podium, and the elderly woman sat down in one of the 4 chairs. The couple stayed back, but they did not sit. Charlie knew they must be Michael's parents, but she did not recognize them. When she was young, they had just been parents, a species that was, for the most part, unremarkable. She realized suddenly that she didn't even know their names. Michael's parents had not gone out of their way to interact with their son's friends, and Charlie had literally spoken to them as Michael's mom and Michael's dad, as if those were appropriate forms of address. The man at the podium introduced himself as the school's principal. He said a few things about loss and community, and the fleeting preciousness of youth. He talked briefly about Michael's kindness, his artistic talent, and the impression he made, even as a small child, on everyone he met. It was true, Charlie reflected. Michael had been an unusually charismatic child. He wasn't exactly a leader, but they all found themselves wanting to please him, to make him smile, and so they often did the things they knew he wanted to do, just to make him happy. The principal finished and introduced Michael's parents, Joan and Donald Brooks. They stood at the podium awkwardly, each looking from face to face in the crowd, as if they were not sure how they had gotten here. Finally, Joan stepped forward. "It feels strange to be up here," was the first thing she said, and a murmur of something like agreement swept quietly through the crowd. "We are so grateful to all of you for coming, especially those of you who came from out of town." She looked directly at the front row, talking to Charlie and the others. "Some of Michael's friends have come from all over, and I think that it is a testament to who he was that 10 years later, with your lives on new paths, moving on to a whole new stage of life." Still close to the stage, Charlie could see she was about to cry, tears wavering in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "We are grateful you are here. We wanted to give Michael a legacy with this scholarship, but it is clear that he has already left one, all on his own." Marla grabbed Charlie's hand, and Charlie squeezed it back. "I want to say," Joan continued, "something about the families who are not here. As we all know, Michael was not the only child lost during those terrible few months. She read out 4 more names, 2 girls and 2 boys. Charlie glanced at Marla. They all knew there had been other children, but Michael's death had loomed so great in all their lives that they had never even talked about the other victims. Now, Charlie felt a pang of guilt. To someone, those little girls and boys had been as vital as Michael. To someone, their losses had meant the end of the world. She closed her eyes for a moment. I can't mourn everyone, she thought. No one can. Joan was still talking. Although their families have moved on to other places, those young boys and girls will always have a place in our hearts. Now I would like to call to speak a young man who was particularly close to my son. Carlton, if you would. They all watched in surprise as Carlton stood and climbed up behind the podium. Joan hugged him tightly and stayed close behind him as he pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. He cleared his throat, looking over the heads of the crowd, then crumpled the paper up again and put it in his pocket. I don't remember as much about Michael as I should, he said finally. Too much of those years is a blur. I know we met when we were still in diapers, but I don't remember that, thankfully. There was a soft titter through the crowd. I do know that as far as back as I have memories, Michael is in them. I remember playing superheroes, drawing, which he was much better at than me. And as we got older, I remember, well, playing superheroes and drawing. What I really remember, though, is that my days were always more exciting when he was in them. He was smarter than me. He was the one always coming up with new ideas, new ways to get in trouble. Sorry about those lamps, by the way, Mrs. Brooks. If I had jumped the way Michael said, I probably would have only broken one. Donald laughed, a gulping, desperate sound. Charlie shifted uncomfortably and pulled her hand from Marla's with an apologetic half-smile. Their grief, naked, was too much to watch. It was raw, an open wound, and she could not stand to look. Carlton came back down to sit with them. Michael's grandmother spoke, and then his father, who had recovered enough to share a memory of taking his son to his first art class. He told the crowd about the scholarship for a graduating senior who has demonstrated both excellence and passion in the arts, and announced the winner of the first one, Anne Park, a slight Vietnamese girl who came quickly up to the stage to accept her plaque and hugs from Michael's parents. It must have been strange for Anne, Charlie thought, her honor so overshadowed by its origins. But then she realized Anne must have known Michael too, however much in passing. After the ceremony, they went to say hello to Michael's parents, hugging them and making sounds of condolence. What do you say to someone who has lost a child? Can it be any easier? Can 10 years make a difference? Or do they wake up each morning as fresh with grief as the day he died? On a long cafeteria table by the stage, pictures and cards were collecting slowly. People had brought flowers, notes to Michael's parents or to him. Things they remembered, things they wished they had said. Charlie went over and browsed through them. There were pictures of her and the others, as well as of Michael. It shouldn't have surprised her. They were all together constantly, as a group or in rotating groups of 2 and 3. She saw herself in the middle of a smiling pose. Her, Michael, and John, all covered in mud, with Jessica beside them, still perfectly clean, refusing to go near them. Charlie smiled. That looks about right. In another, a 5-year-old Marla struggled to support the weight of her newborn little brother, with Lamar peering suspiciously at the tiny thing over her shoulder. Some of Michael's drawings were there. Some of Michael's drawings were there too. Crayon scribbles professionally, incongruously framed. Charlie picked one up, a drawing of what she supposed was a T-Rex stomping through a city. It was actually, she realized now, almost amazing how talented he was. While she and the others were scribbling stick figures, Michael's drawings looked realistic, sort of. That's really good, John said over her shoulder. Charlie startled. You scared me, she said. Sorry. Charlie looked back at the drawing. Whatever it was better than she could draw now. Suddenly her chest tightened, gripped with loss and rage. It wasn't just that Michael died young. It was what that truly meant. He had been stopped in his tracks. Years, decades of life, snatched and torn violently from him. She felt herself well up with youthful indignation, as if she were a child again, wanting only to whine. It's not fair. Taking a deep breath, Charlie set the picture back down on the table and turned away. The gathering was continuing, but she needed to leave. She caught Marla's eye, and Marla, as scarily intuitive as always, nodded and caught Lamar's sleeve. From their various vantage points, they all headed for the parking lot. No one seemed to notice their departure, which made sense. Except for Carlton, they were all strangers here. In the lot, they stopped by Marla's car. She had somehow called down a miracle and found a space right next to the school. Can I play my game now? Jason said immediately, and Marla found her keys in her purse and handed them over. Don't drive away, she warned. Suddenly, Marla grabbed her brother and pulled him close, hugging him to her for a long minute. Geez, I'm only going to the car, he muttered when she let him go. Yeah, maybe I should let you drive away, she said, giving him a little push. She cleared her throat. So, are we going to Freddy's? She said. They all looked at one another. Yeah, Charlie said. I think we should. Somehow following this, going back to Freddy's seemed like more than a game. It felt right. Let's meet at 10. Let's meet there at 10, she said. Hey Jessica, can you catch a ride with the guys or something? I'm gonna go for a walk. You can come with us, Marla said. I promised Jason I'd take him to the movies. Charlie headed down the road without waiting to hear the rest of the discussion. A dozen feet from the lot, she realized she was being followed. She turned around. John? Do you mind if I come? You're going to your old house, right? How did you know that? It's the only interesting thing out this way. Anyway, I went to see my old place too. It was painted blue, and there was a garden in the yard. It was weird. I know it wasn't blue when I lived there, but I couldn't remember what color it was supposed to be. Everything's so different. Charlie didn't say anything. She wasn't sure she wanted John to come with her. Her house. Her father's house. It was private. She thought of the first time John had seen the toys, his fascination, an interest that was all his, that had nothing to do with pleasing her. She relented. Okay, you can come. Is it... He hesitated. Is it different? It's really not, Charlie said. It wasn't quite true, but she wasn't sure how to explain the thing that had changed. They walked together for the better part of 3 miles, away from town and down old roads, first paved, then gravel. As they neared the place, they left the roads, ascending the steep incline of a hill overrun with brush and trees that should have been trimmed or cut down ages ago. 3 rooftops peeked over the leaves, scattered widely over the hill. But no one had lived in these houses in a long time. At last they walked up the driveway, and John stopped short, staring up at the house. "I thought it would be less intimidating," he said softly. Impatient, Charlie took his arm for a second and pulled him away, leading them around the side of the house. It was one thing for him to be here with her, but she was not quite ready to let someone else inside. She was not quite sure she wanted to go inside again anyway. He followed her without protest, as if aware that they were in her territory, and she would decide where they went. The property was large, more than a lawn. There were woods surrounding the wide space of the backyard, and as a child, Charlie had often felt like she was in her own little realm, ruler of all she surveyed. The grass had gone wild, weeds growing feral and up to their knees. They walked the perimeter. John peered into the woods, and Charlie was struck by her old childhood fear, like something out of a fairy tale. "Don't go into the woods alone, Charlotte," her father warned. It was not sinister, just a parent's warning. Don't get lost, like telling her not to cross the street without holding someone's hand, or not to touch the stove when it's hot. But Charlie took it more seriously. She knew from her storybooks, as all children did, that the woods contained wolves and more dangerous things. She caught John's sleeve. "Don't," she said, and he pulled back from the woods, not asking why. Instead, he went to a tree in the middle of the yard and put a hand on it. "Remember that tree?" He grinned, something a little wicked in his voice. "Of course," Charlie said, walking over. "It's been here longer than I ever was." But he was looking at her, waiting for more. And suddenly she remembered. It had been a sunny day, springtime. They were 6-year-olds, maybe. John was visiting, and they were playing hide and seek, half supervised by Charlie's father, who was in his garage workshop, absorbed in his machines. The door was open so he would notice if someone screamed, but short of that, the outdoors was their own. John counted to 10, eyes covered and facing the tree that was home base. The yard was wide and open. There were not many places to hide, so Charlie, buoyed up by the excitement of the game, dared to hide beyond the forbidden edge of the woods, just barely past the tree line. John searched the other places first, behind her father's car, in the corner where one part of the garage jutted out, the space beneath the porch where a child could just barely crawl. He realized where she must be, and Charlie braced herself to run as he began to walk to the edges of the yard, darting into the woods and out again, looking behind trees. When at last he found her, she took off, tearing across the lawn to the home base tree. He was just behind her, so close he could almost touch her, and she sped on, staying just out of reach. She hit the tree, almost slamming into it, and John was right behind her, bumping into her a second later, too fast to stop. They were both giggling hysterically, and then they stopped at the same moment, still gasping to catch their breath. "Hey, Charlotte," John said, stressing her name in the mocking tone he always used. "Don't call me that," Charlie said automatically. "You ever see grown-ups kiss?" He picked up a stick and started digging at the tree bark, like he was more interested in that than in her answer. Charlie shrugged. "Yeah, I guess so. Want to try it?" He still wasn't looking at her. His face was streaked with dirt, like it often was, and his hair was sticking out in all directions. A twig caught in it above his forehead. "Gross," Charlie said, wrinkling her nose. Then, after a moment, "Yeah, okay." John dropped the stick and leaned toward her, his hands behind his back. Charlie closed her eyes, waiting, still not entirely sure what she was supposed to do. "Charlotte!" It was her father. Charlie jumped back. John's face was so close to hers that she banged into him with her forehead. "Ow!" he yelled, clapping his hand to his nose. Charlie's father came around the side of the tree. What are you up to, John? He pried John's fingers away from his nose. You're not bleeding, you'll be fine, he said. Charlotte, closer to the house, please. He then pointed his finger, directing them forward. John, it looks like your mom is here anyway. He walked ahead of them, toward the driveway where her car had just pulled in. Yeah, okay. John trotted off toward the driveway, turning once to wave at Charlie. He was grinning like something wonderful had happened, although Charlie was not quite sure what it was. Oh my, Charlie said now, covering her face, sure it was bright red. When she looked up again, John was grinning that same satisfied 6-year-old grin. You know, my nose still hurts when it rains, he said, touching a finger to it. It does not, Charlie said. She leaned back against the tree. I can't believe you tried to kiss me. We were 6, Charlie stared at him accusingly. Even the littlest of hearts wants what it wants, John said in a mock romantic voice. But there was an edge of something real in it, something not well enough hidden. Charlie realized suddenly that he was standing very close to her. Let's go see your dad's workshop, John said abruptly, too loud, and Charlie nodded. Okay. She regretted it as she said it. She did not want to open up the workshop door. She closed her eyes, still leaning against the tree. She could still see it. It was all she could see when she thought of that place. The twitching, malformed metal skeleton in its dark corner, with its wrenching shutters and its blistering silver eyes. The image welled up in her head until it was all there was. The memory radiated a cutting anguish, but she did not know who it belonged to. To the thing, to her father, or to herself. Charlie felt a hand on her shoulder and opened her eyes. It was John, frowning at her like he was worried. Charlie, are you okay? No. Yes, she said. Come on, let's go see what's in the workshop. It was not locked, and there was no real reason it should be, Charlie thought. Her eyes went first to the dark corner. The figures was not there. There was a weathered apron hanging in its place, the one her father had worn for soldering, and his goggles next to it. But there was no sign of that uncanny presence. Charlie should have felt relief, but she didn't. Only a vague unease. She looked around. There seemed to be almost nothing left of the workshop. The benches were there, where her father had assembled and tweaked his inventions. But the materials, the blueprints, and half of the finished robots that were once crammed into every surface had disappeared. Where are they? Had her aunt had them carted away to a junkyard to rust and crumble among other discarded, useless things? Or had her father done it himself, so no one else would have to? The concrete floor was littered here, and there were scraps. The concrete floor was littered here and there with scraps. Whoever had done the cleanup had not been thorough. Charlie knelt and picked up an oddly shaped scrap of wood, then a small circuit board. She turned it over. Whose brain were you? She wondered. But it did not matter, really. Not really. It was battered and worn. The etched copper too badly scratched to repair, even if someone wanted to. Charlie, John said from across the workshop. He was in the dark corner. If the skeleton had been there, it could have reached out to touch him. But it's not there. What? Come see what I found. Charlie went. John was standing beside her father's toolbox, and he stepped away as she came over, giving her space. Charlie knelt down before it. It looked as if it had just been polished. It was made of dark stained wood, glossy with some kind of liqueur. She opened it gently. Charlie picked up an awl from the top tray and held it for a moment. the rounded wooden handle fitting into the palm of her hand as if it had been made for her to use. Not that she knew how. The last time she had picked it up, she could barely fit her fingers around its base. She picked up the tools one after another, lifting them from their places. The toolbox had wooden spaces carved out to fit the precise shapes of each item. All the tools were polished and clean, their wooden handles smooth and their metal unrusted. They looked as though they had been used just that morning, wiped down and put away meticulously, like someone still cared for them. She just looked at them with a fierce, unexpected joy, as if something she had fought for was returned to her. But her joy felt wrong, misplaced. Looking at her father's things set her off balance. Something in the world was not as it should be. Seized suddenly with an unfounded fear, she thrust the awl back into its place in the box, dropping it like something burning. She closed the lid, but she did not stand. Memory overtook her, and she closed her eyes, not fighting against it. Her feet were wedged in the dirt, and two large and calloused hands covered her eyes. Suddenly, there was a bright light, and Charlie squinted, squirming impatiently to see what was before her. 3 complete and gleaming figures towered over her, motionless, the sun reflecting off every edge and contour. They were blinding to behold. "What do you think?" She heard the question, but could not answer it. Her eyes hadn't adjusted. The 3 masses of standing metal all looked similar in structure, but Charlie had grown accustomed to seeing more than was there, imagining the final result. For a long time now, there had been 3 empty suits, hanging like carcasses from a rafter in the attic. Charlie knew that they had a special purpose, and now she understood what it was. 2 long beams protruded from the top of the head of one of the hulking masses. The head itself was solid and skull-like. The beams looked as if they had been violently thrust there. "That's the rabbit," Charlie squealed, proud of herself. "You aren't scared of him?" the voice asked. "Of course not. He looks like Theodore." "Theodore. That's right." The figure in the middle was more clearly rendered. Its face was chiseled, its features distinct. It was clearly a bear, and a single metal beam stuck out from the top of its head as well. Charlie was puzzled for a moment, then smiled. "For the top hat," she said with confidence. The last form was perhaps the most frightening. A long metal clamp protruded from its empty face, in the place where a mouth might go. It was holding something on a platter, a metal structure that looked like a jaw, wires running like strewn spaghetti up and down the frame and in and out of sockets. "That one's scary," she admitted hesitantly. "Well, this part will look like a cupcake." Her father pressed down on the top, and the jaw snapped shut, making Charlie jump, then giggle. Suddenly, her laughter stopped. She had been so distracted she'd forgotten. "I'm not supposed to stand here. I don't stand here." Her hands were trembling. How could she have forgotten? The corner. She looked at the ground, unable to lift her eyes, unable to move. One of her shoes was untied. There was a screw next to her foot and an old piece of tape, opaque with dirt. There was something behind her. Charlie? It was John. "Charlie!" She looked up at him. "Sorry, just lost. This place." She stood and took a step forward, positioning herself in the place she remembered. She glanced behind her as if the memory might manifest. The corner was empty. There was nothing. She knelt again and put her hand on the ground, fishing around until she found a small screw in the bare dirt. She palmed it, then looked closer. There were small holes in the ground, exposed when she moved the loose dirt. Charlie ran her fingers over them, thoughtfully. Charlie, I have to tell you something. There was something urgent in John's voice. Charlie looked around the workshop and stood up. Can we go outside? She said. I can't breathe in here. Yeah, of course, he said. He followed her out into the yard and back to the hide-and-seek tree. She was tired, a wrung-out exhaustion deep inside. She would be fine in a minute, but she wanted a place that held only silly childhood memories. She sat down in the grass, leaned against the trunk, and waited for John to talk. He settled himself cross-legged in front of her, a little stiffly, smoothing his pants, and she laughed. Are you worried about getting dirty? Times changed, he said with a wry smile. What do you have to tell me? She asked, and his face grew serious. I should have said something a long time ago, he said. When something happens like that, you don't trust your memory, don't trust your own mind. What are you talking about? Charlie asked. Sorry. He took a deep breath. I saw someone that night, the night Michael disappeared. What do you mean? Remember when we were sitting at the table by the stage and the animals started going crazy? I remember, Charlie said. It had been bizarre, their movements upsetting. They were moving too fast, bending and spinning, cycling through their limited program moves over and over. They seemed frantic, panicked. Charlie was mesmerized. She should have been afraid of them, but she was not. She saw it in their juddering motion, a kind of desperation. She was reminded for a moment of dreams of running, dreams when the world depended on her going just 10 steps forward, yet her body could only move in slow motion. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Chaotically, violently, the animatronic animals on stage thrashed robotic limbs in all directions, with their eyes rolling in their sockets. What did you see? Charlie said to John now, shaking her head as though she could rid it of the image. There was another mascot, he said. A bear. Freddy? Charlie interrupted without thinking. No, not Freddy. John took her hands as if trying to calm them both, but he let go before he spoke again. It was standing right near us, next to our table, but it wasn't looking at the stage like everyone else was. That technician came over, remember? And even he was just watching the animatronics. I guess he was trying to figure out what was happening. I looked over at the mascot, and it looked back at me. He stopped. John, what? Charlie said, impatient. The animatronics on stage stopped moving, and I looked over at them. And when we all turned back around, Michael was gone, and so was the mascot. Charlie stared at him in disbelief. You saw the kidnapper, she said. I didn't know what I saw, John said. It was all chaos. I didn't even think about it. I didn't make the connection. It was just another animal at Freddy's. I didn't think about who might have been inside it. I was a kid, you know? You figure that the grown-ups already know everything you know. Yeah, Charlie said. I know. Do you remember anything? What the person looked like? John was staring up at the sky, as if he were seeing something Charlie could not. Yes, he said. His voice was deliberate, steady. The eyes. They were all I could see. But I still see them sometimes, like they're right there in front of me. They were dead. What? They were dead, just dull and flat, like they still moved and blinked and saw, but whatever was behind them had died a long time ago. He fell silent. It was growing dark. There was a bright, almost unnatural streak of pink across the western sky, and Charlie shivered. We should get to the car, she said. It's almost time to meet everyone. Yeah, John said. but he didn't move right away, still staring into the distance. "John, we have to go," Charlie said. He seemed to come back to himself slowly. "Yeah," he said. "We should go." He got up and brushed off his pants, then grinned at Charlie. "Race you?" he said, and took off running. Charlie chased after him, her feet pounding the asphalt, and her arms swinging free. And that is chapter 3.
Nice. Done.
Yeah, no, we're definitely spacing out chapters.
Yeah,
Like,
without a
shit.
doubt. Holy crap.
Oh my god.
I'm not gonna lie, I think we should just do the outro and call it a night.
I agree.
Oh my god.
But real quick, Elliot, what are your thoughts on this chapter? You know, like, what do you have to say about it?
I'm glad that we could kind of get that closure on who Michael really was. And like the fact that like we get like a little bit of backstory of like what John saw. And it's like, oh, this raises the mystery a bit more.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Like, it definitely adds intrigue, and it opens up more of the story.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my god.
Right,
With that...
Next time we're doing 2 chapters.
Yeah.
No, holy fuck, that was long.
Yeah. Way longer than we thought.
But, anything else you guys want to say before we call it a night?
I'm good.
I'm solid.
Alright, so this has been... Oh, what do you...
I've got nothing.
Okay, so with this has been P. Shattuck with the amazing Kaiser, Elliot, and Anne. And we'll see you all later. Next time we won't do as many chapters.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Later.